All right, let's go ahead and get started, everyone. Thank you for joining us again tonight for another wrestling webinar. Tonight we'll have Jeremy Walton with us discussing stalling. We did have Justin Harrison, who I believe was going to try to join. He hasn't joined yet, so we may have to give him some time later on if he does join us. But again, thank you for joining us tonight. We hope you all are well and safe still. We're excited to get the school year going and the sports season underway. As in the past, please use the Q&A box and the chat box if needed. If you need to ask anything, we'll answer those throughout the session, and then any general questions we'll answer at the end as well. It is being recorded as the past sessions have been. It'll be posted on the FHSA Central Hub. So you can go back and rewatch it if you missed anything, if you want to re-see anything or rehear anything. Jeremy Walton is also going to be sending me the PowerPoint, so that will get posted on the FHSA Central Hub as well. And at this time, let Robbie say a few words, and then Jeremy will take it over.
All right, thank you, Jeremy. As you know, we put this presentation time at all these schedules, and Jeremy Walton to take part of this presentation. I want to thank you all for joining us, and looking forward to what Jeremy has to say versus stalling. And Jeremy, you've been put on the clock, but they definitely want this done before no pressure. So, Jeremy, the floor is yours.
All right, no pressure's felt. Well, I want to take this opportunity to talk about a really important area and aspect of wrestling officiating, and that is stalling. I first want to by saying thank you to Bob Whitaker, Mike Ingrao, and Brian Spiro, who are three guys that I was able to talk quite a bit with over the course of the last couple weeks, and to go over the presentation and to make sure it was covering what we all think it needs to be covering for all of us officials in the state. If you disagree with anything that I said, then it's probably a part that Brian Spiro was involved in. And so at the end of this presentation, I'll be providing his email, his cell, and his home address. And so all those questions need to be probably sent over to Brian and not myself. But I hope this is informative, comprehensive, and then also that everybody learns here by this presentation. So to get started, highly effective officials at the top levels of officiating recognize and they call stalling. And that is that one of the key differences between officials who are, average, subpar, good to great, that good to great distinction typically can be found in the way that they recognize and that they make stalling, especially in the big matches. Sometimes lesser officials will say things like, I don't want to inject myself into a match by making that stalling call. I don't want to take over a match. I don't want to dictate the outcome of a match. But when you make stalling calls as an official, basically what you're doing is you're doing your job, right? You're not injecting yourself. You're enforcing the rules of fair play. You're making the correct call, and it's going to have a positive outcome on the match. I mean, how many times in a match where there's been nothing going on, and then you as the official make the stalling call? What typically follows after a stalling warning, you typically see that there's going to be action that takes place. If it's on the feet, typically you make that call, and you'll see a setup and a shot come afterwards. So next, stalling must be called consistently. All right, there's nothing more frustrating to a coach and wrestlers than when stalling is called inconsistently. We must be consistent in the way that we call stalling, and we'll talk more about that. Objective criteria should be used for every stalling call. We have a rule book. If you read your rule book, which is very important to do, and some officials, I don't think, ever crack open their rule book, but there is actually, even though it's 99% judgment and there's some subjectivity to it, there are actually very specific objective criteria that we can use to make the call, and that we can also use if we have a coaches conference in a discussion with a coach at the table as to why we make that call if we're asked. Effective officials use the pre-meet. Okay, the pre-meet is a great opportunity to communicate expectations and then also to talk about stalling. My pre-meet, whether it's captains or teams, and I've even used this in the 5-7 seconds I have at like regional finals or state finals or state semifinal match, when I have that few seconds before wrestling starts, I will say things like, hey guys, wrestle hard, but exercise good sportsmanship at all time, work to score all 3 periods, all 3 positions, or I'm going to hit you for stalling, and don't back out of bounds. Don't walk out of bounds, right? And preventative officiating is good officiating, and you'll find when you set that expectation to the student athletes, to the coaches, if you have a coaches meeting, we have district meetings now with coaches, and stalling is something that we talk about. Hey guys, we're going to call it. Don't use it as a tactic, or prepare to get penalized. And that preventative officiating has a tendency to help minimize the use of stalling. And this is something that I've seen, this last point. Stalling is a makeup call. I added this because I've seen this a lot over my time the last several years traveling the state, evaluating officials and watching other officials work, is that sometimes officials have the tendency, if they miss a call, and normally like the crowd, the coaches, if you miss a call, they'll let you know that you've missed a call. And I've seen later on in matches, very marginal stalling calls are made. And it's pretty clear and evident that those are calls that the official's making, most likely to make up for a missed call that they made previously in the match. And we should never do that. We should always be fair in the way that we officiate. Okay, stalling. Stalling's probably the most controversial call that we're going to make as officials on the mat. I can probably think of no other more controversial calls where there's more confusion on than stalling. So it's important that we all have a good grasp on what stalling is, what stalling isn't, to be in good position to recognize it, and when we recognize it, to make the call. And if we're all on the same page, I think it will take away from this confusion and this controversy that has the tendency to surround stalling. Also, it's important to note that coaching stalling is a tactic. Some teams do it more than others, and we generally know who those teams are where they are coached to stall, right? It's coached as a tactic because sometimes it can be an effective tactic. But it's something that we need to try to eliminate from wrestling. And part of that responsibility falls on us as officials. In our association, we have an assignment process, but we also have a booking process as well. It's a hybrid way that we get our matches. And I mean, we know the teams that stall, we know the teams where there's just action. So I know in our association, when it's my opportunity to book, right, I'm going to try to pick matches that involve teams like Charlotte and Manatee and Palm Harbor High School, because we know that coaches like Coach Radner and Coach Goog and Charlotte's coach and guys like Dave Mason over at Jesuit. I mean, these guys are just guys that really work. They work aggressively every position, and they're ready to go. And I forgot temporarily Coach Evan Robinson over at Charlotte. But stalling is a penalty. So if coaches are going to coach it as a tactic, wrestlers are going to use it as a tactic in the match, then we need to penalize it accordingly when it happens on the mat. Set the tone early in the match. This is so important. The way that we call stalling in the first 30, 60 seconds of a match is going to set the tone for the rest of the match. And what I mean by that is if you allow stalling to occur in the beginning of the match and you don't call it, all right, then probably you're not going to call it, and that boring, low-scoring match that you have with no action is going to persist for 6 minutes. It's not fun for you as the official. It's not fun for the fans to watch or anybody. So set the tone early. If guys are stalling, then call them early. And here's what's going to happen. You make that stalling call, action is going to improve in the match. Generally speaking, as we said, there's objective criteria that can be applied. In the rule book, we have two sections. We have 524 and 7.6. It's two pages. And then there is a stalling penalty chart footnote. So there is a ton of objective criteria in the rule book. And, read your rule book. These 2 pages are so important to learn, to memorize, to apply, to make us good officials when it comes to making that stalling call. And, this presentation is just to clarify what stalling is, what it isn't, and just isolate some simple ways and techniques that we can all carry with us as we officiate. So as we get to the rules, as I said, it's in 524 and 7.6, and this is in the 2019-2020 rule book. I don't have the latest rule book to know if those sections are going to change, but that's what it should be. And this is basically what the rule book tells us, is that each wrestler is required to make an honest attempt, and notice the words that are underlined, an honest attempt to stay inside of the 10-foot circle and to wrestle aggressively, regardless of the position or the time or the score of the match. And both wrestlers bore an equal responsibility to initiate action. All right? So wrestle in the 10-foot circle, wrestle aggressively, wrestle to score, regardless of where we're at in the match, and both guys bore the weight. It's just not on one wrestler to carry the action. And then also, when an official recognizes stalling in any position, we should make that penalty call and make it without hesitation. And think about this when we're officiating. How poorly would it reflect on the official if a takedown occurs in front of us? Everybody knows it's a takedown, and we wait 8 to 10 to 15 seconds to make that call, to score those points. That happens all the time with the stalling call. We'll see officials that just struggle with recognizing stalling, and they're staring at it, and everybody knows it. The coaches are screaming for it, the fans are screaming for it, and the last person to realize it is the official on the mat. And when he finally does make that call, he's hesitated. It's far past the point where the stalling had occurred to the point where it needed to be penalized. It was penalized, which is a good thing, but it just reflects poorly. It looks poorly on the official when they hesitate and they overthink the call when they clearly see that there's been a stalling that's taken place. Like I said, the burden to eliminate the use of stalling, it's just not on us as officials. Even though it's our responsibility to make that call, we need to involve everybody at every level: coaches, student athletes, athletic directors, and trainers. When it comes to training officials, when it comes to this, everybody's looking for that competitive edge, but we don't want them to find that competitive edge in stalling tactics. And this is something that I developed early in my officiating career, and that's developing a philosophy for stalling, right? A mental attitude or a philosophy. And I kind of coined a little philosophy that I use that I think successful officials should adopt for identifying and calling stalling. And that's this. Stalling is a situational tactic used by wrestlers which must be addressed consistently by the wrestling official according to the rules and the official's interpretation of the situation. So let me repeat my philosophy again. My stalling philosophy is that stalling is a situational tactic used by wrestlers which must be addressed consistently by the wrestling official according to the rules and the official's interpretation of the situation. And with having that philosophy, with understanding the rules, the criteria in developing good judgment, each official needs to develop a pattern of consistency from match to match and meet to meet. We're always going to understand that official 1 and official 2, there's going to be some inconsistencies, right? We're not all the same. We're different in the way that we officiate. Although at the highest level in the state of Florida, I will say that we are doing a much better job the last 3, 4, 5 years of being consistent in this matter, and in a lot of other matters. But at least inside of ourselves in the way that we officiate, we need to develop a pattern of consistency. Now, one great way to do this is the use of technology. Associations should be investing in and utilizing technology, and especially video, for the means of trying to develop this pattern of consistency and identifying deficiencies in this regard, and proficiencies. And so, I mean, we need to be recording guys as part of our training. Our training officer, our training committees need to be going out, need to be watching, need to be recording, need to be sitting down with officials and watching and showing inconsistencies, especially in this matter. And we also have, another good tool is, we have things like Big Ten Network, Flow Wrestling, where we just have an immense amount of wrestling video to consume and to watch. And some of these are matches at a very, very high level where we have the best of the best officials. And there is nothing wrong with watching, mimicking, and stealing techniques from officials that do things the right way. And so when we develop our pattern of consistency, this is a great way to do that. All right, as officials, when we are calling stalling, we need to be confident. We hear so many times, we hear this even in training, sell the call, sell the call. I think that's a terrible thing to say. I understand what's behind it, but we don't sell calls, right? We have confidence that we made the right call. And with that confidence, we shouldn't be selling calls, but we should be demonstrating clear and commanding signals, and then also verbal commands. When we make that stalling warning, it should be warning green stalling, action green, right? We need to be communicating so that there's no doubt to anybody there in that gym, the wrestlers, the coaches, the table, the assistant official, if he's there, that a stalling has been called. And we talk about consistency. Here's a little phrase for consistency. What is consistency? Consistency is doing things the right way and the same way every time. Consistency, doing things the right way and the same way every time when we're out on the mat. And you'll find that even though a coach may not like the call that you've made, if you're consistent in the way that you officiate, coaches will respect that, right? And if you're inconsistent, then that's where you're going to find yourself in trouble, especially over this highly controversial call of stalling that has controversy and confusion around it at times. And then, as officials, we should have in our back pocket, we should have 4 verbal commands that we use. We're not coaching the wrestlers to wrestle aggressively in this manner, but we're using words like center, action, improve, and contact. We're not directing it at any one wrestler in particular. It's not action, green, action. It's action, improve, center, or contact. These are general commands that we're using as officials to facilitate fair play and a fair and a smooth match. So who's responsible for initiating action? This is always a good, and how do we identify who's initiating the action? So as defined, each wrestler is required to make honest attempts, stay in that circle, wrestle aggressively, regardless of time, position, or score, and they're to work to score. We need to see scoring maneuvers, work for the fall. So how do we know when significant or aggressive action is taking place? And here's a formula that I've seen and coined, and that is when somebody initiates movement plus follow-up, that constitutes significant or aggressive action. When I say initiate movement, I mean to begin or originate a move or a series of moves that requires the opponent to do something, to counter move or to have some kind of action. And then the follow-up is an attempt to fully execute the move or series of moves to score. And so that's when significant action or aggressive wrestling takes place. We commonly refer to this as chain wrestling. And again, some of those schools that I denoted in my service area or around my service area, they're great at this, right? The wrestlers go out there. They don't have 3 moves that they use and they have nothing else. These are guys that go out there and they chain wrestle. They put moves together. They aggressively work. The stalling penalty sequence. This has had some modifications to it the last couple years. We've had 2 significant changes to it. So I want to go through it. The stalling penalty sequence. The sequence is that the first offense for stalling is going to be a warning. The second offense is a 1-point stalling penalty point. The third offense is a 1-point stalling penalty point. The fourth offense, right, this is a change this year. We are now going to stop the action. We're going to call stalling, signal for stalling. We're going to award 2 penalty points to the opponent, and now the opponent will have the choice of position on the restart. Okay, so before we were waiting for that sequence potentially to break. Now we stop that action immediately. And then if we get to a 5th offense, we finally come to the disqualification of the student athlete for their 5th offense for stalling. The other change that we've seen recently is that the stalling penalty sequence has been taken out of the general penalty sequence, and that's been done so us as officials can have more latitude, freedom, and comfort in making the penalty, the stalling penalty calls. So warning, 1 point, 1 point, stop the action, 2 points, give choice of position on the restart, and then disqualification. That is our penalty sequence that we have at this point. And it's not tied to the general penalty chart at this point. All right, now let's start getting into the positions and what constitutes stalling. Stalling from the neutral position. Okay, in the neutral position, we want to give wrestlers opportunity and time to work, right? So we want to be aggressive in the way that we're calling stalling. We want to be able to recognize it and make that call, but especially in the beginning of the match, we want to give guys the opportunity to set moves up. They involve tie-ups and reflexive actions, changing positions, working for angles, feinting. We want to give them that ability. But at some point within the first 15, 20, 30 seconds, each wrestler does need to make honest attempt at making contact, trying to work to secure a takedown. And again, what constitutes this action? Get back to our formula. An honest attempt, aggressive wrestling, it includes initiating action, initiating a move, and following up that move to try to secure a scoring maneuver on your feet. So who's the aggressor? Who's the aggressor and who's initiating the action? There's some different things that we can look at as officials. All right. Are they circling? Is the guy backing or is he circling? Is he changing levels? Is he changing directions? Is he attempting to try to create an angle? Is he working a setup, trying to get in there for that scoring opportunity? I have another one here. Attempting to penetrate. Is he shooting? Is he legitimately attempting something? Because I've seen guys that get out there and they do not make legitimate attempts, especially when it comes to shots, and they're just looking to create distance and space. I had this happen my senior year. I remember we were at Bradenton Southeast, and I had to wrestle a state finalist from the previous year. And I knew he was going to maul me if he got his hands on me. And so for 2 periods, I just did these big sweeping outside shots where I didn't come within 3 feet of my opponent's leg, just trying to dance to the outer boundary and not making legitimate attempts. And about 30 seconds left in the second period, I still hadn't been warned, so I was continuing to use the tactic. The score was 0-0 before he finally got his hands on me and got a collar tie and headbutted me in the face and snapped me to the mat and began to do the work that he did in that match. But another thing is presenting themselves. What do I mean by presenting themselves? Is the wrestler standing in the 10-foot circle? Is he giving his opponent an opportunity to work? Right, that's what I mean by presenting themselves. Sometimes we get into the third period and you have a guy that's down by 2, 3, 4 points. He hasn't done anything all match. The other guy has bore the brunt of all the scoring maneuvers and taking all the risks. And in the last 30 or 40 seconds of the match, you'll have a guy and he's not making legitimate attempts, but he's moving aggressively and a lot. and the coach is screaming for stallings. But as long as the opponent who's bore the brunt of both guys bear equal responsibility, as long as he's presenting himself, he's not backing, I'm probably not making that call. All right, stalling tactics are continuously avoiding contact with the opponent. All right, and that's where we give the contact command. If a guy is continuously avoiding contact, right, contact, gentlemen. Right? If he continues to do it, make the call. Also, preventing an opponent from returning to or remaining in bounds. Sometimes when we're at the boundary, there's no significant action. We do have the prerogative as officials to stop and restart at the 10-foot circle. We also can give that center command where we want the opponent who's in bounds to allow the opponent who's out of bounds to return in. Certainly, there can be significant action that can happen at the boundary, and we're not trying to discourage that. Scoring maneuvers and attempts can happen there. But when there's no significant action taking place, they do need to make attempts to work back towards the center, back in bounds, and an opponent should not be preventing an opponent from returning in bounds. That's stalling. Not attempting to secure a takedown, no legitimate attempts. And then also we'll see guys that block with their arms, forearms, or their head. You see guys, a common stalling technique is where a guy is caught in a bear hug, he's caught in over-unders, and usually by an opponent who's bigger and stronger, and they just bury their forehead in the chest of the opponent, not really working aggressively to get out of the hold. They're just blocking and preventing the other wrestler from being able to work. Some other tactics that are used: double collar tie with no follow-up move. We have a coach that was teaching that inside of our service area this past year, and his intention was it's a double collar tie, and we're just looking to hang on the head and wear a guy out. And I understand what he was trying to teach his student athletes, and to be tough and grind and to wear the guy out, but they were just sitting on it 30, 45 seconds a minute with no follow-up movement. That's stalling. They're tying the guy up, they're blocking, they've got the forearms in, and they're preventing the opponent from being able to do wrestling moves. Using underhooks, overhooks without attempting to take down. Counter wrestling, we see guys that you just know they're not going to shoot. The other guy is going to bear the brunt of initiating that action, and he's going to shoot, and this guy is just waiting to sprawl, work for headlocks, to spin behind. So watch guys that are just looking to counter wrestle. That is a stalling technique. Backing up or pushing, playing the edge. We have guys where you blow that whistle, they're in the center 10-foot circle, and they circle, 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 and next thing you know, within 10, 12 seconds, they're out at the edge of the boundary, and so if they get in trouble, they're just looking to scoot off of the mat. So if that happens, give them that center command. They persist to use that, make that call. Backing out of bounds. Not all out of bounds. This is something that Bob Whitaker wanted me to talk about, and it's important to note that not all out of bounds situations from neutral are stalling. This isn't a step out rule, all right? But what it does involve is guys walk out of bounds, they back out of bounds, they're using it as a means of avoiding wrestling to get that fresh start. Clearly, there are circumstances where the natural momentum of aggressive action takes the student athletes out of bounds. That's okay. Blow the whistle, stop the action, get them back to the center. As long as they're working hard, they're being aggressive, they're working to score, we're going to allow that action to continue, and it's going to be legitimate. But what we're looking for, and it's very easy to see, is where guys are just walking out of bounds. And I don't care if this happens in the first 20 seconds of the match or the last 20 seconds. If this happens, this needs to be penalized. This isn't a verbal warning. Hey, red, you walked out of bounds, you backed out of bounds. If it happens again, I'm going to penalize you. No, if he walks out of bounds, make that call. Once again, we've separated stalling penalty chart from the general penalty chart. So there are different ramifications for making that call. We should be very confident and ready to make that call when it happens. And then also pushing or pulling an opponent out of bounds. You know, if I'm standing out of bounds and my opponent's in bounds, and I want a fresh start, and I just grab them with a collar tie and I yank them out and I create an out of bounds situation, that's stalling. If I'm inbounds and my opponent's out of bounds and I take a step in and push him and I create an out of bounds situation unnecessarily, there's no honest attempt to stay inside of the boundary, then that is a stalling as well. Okay, it's stalling on the wrestler. We're going to switch now to the advantaged position, the offensive wrestler. It is stalling on the wrestler in the advantaged position when the offensive wrestler does not wrestle aggressively and attempt to score or secure a fall. Okay, do you notice a theme here? We saw this in the neutral position. Now we see this in the offensive position. If they're not wrestling aggressively to secure a score or a fall, then we have stalling. Is riding the hips stalling? We hear people scream this all the time. He's just riding the hips. He's just riding the hips. Is riding the hips a criteria for stalling? Certainly, not all the time that guys are riding hips is it stalling. It depends what, again, is he wrestling aggressively? You see some guys where they bar arms and they trap arms and they're on the hip and they're very effective at tilting series and they score off it. So if a guy's on the hip, he's working things, he's scoring, that's not stalling. That's working aggressively. But if a guy is using the maneuver to prevent action, he's just holding on, he's just using it as a technique to ride and for control, then that is stalling. And then from the rear standing position, when the offensive wrestler and the defensive wrestler are on their feet and the offensive wrestler is behind and he is not making attempts at mat returns, that is stalling. Generally, there's no time in the rule book that says, hey, after 5 seconds, after 10 seconds, after 15 seconds with no attempt, it's stalling. I have the tendency, I have this internal timer, 7, 8 seconds, I've got to see an attempt. Once a legitimate attempt is made, even if it's unsuccessful, to me, that timer kind of restarts in my head where I'm looking for another legitimate attempt. So do give the offensive wrestler the opportunity to work and have legitimized attempts to return the opponent to the mat. Even if they're unsuccessful, he needs the opportunity to be able to attempt wrestling moves. Next, and this is a definitive criteria. This is objective criteria. If the offensive wrestler breaks down the defensive wrestler and he holds his opponent's heel to his buttocks for more than 5 seconds, all right, he's holding it there, he's got it trapped, he's not letting it go, 5 seconds, there's no verbal count, there's no hand signal here, it's just again, it's an internal timer that we have, all right, it's a stalling, stop the action. Generally speaking, coaches, when that heel is trapped, you hear them screaming at the wrestlers, let it go, let it go, let it go. 5 seconds, if he's not attempting to, allowing that heel off the buttocks, then we make that call. Also, moves not designed to break down an opponent or for the purposes of securing a fall or to prevent an escape or reversal. All right? It's got to be working for the purposes of scoring. Also, if the offensive wrestler is repeatedly dropping back to the ankle or a leg to prevent scoring or to break down for control, it is stalling. Sometimes you blow that whistle and you're starting him in referee's position, and the first thing that offensive wrestler does is he drops back on that leg. He drops back on that leg. He's not working up to improve. Once again, this is an excellent opportunity to use the improve command. Improve, improve. If he's not working up, if that defensive wrestler gives a couple kicks, he's trying to work out of it, or we have 5 or so seconds that ticks by and we don't see improvement, call stalling on that offensive wrestler. He is not using that move for anything, that hold for anything but stalling. So I want to talk a little bit about leg series. Over the years, this has really had some diminishing use in the state of Florida. We don't necessarily see legs being used like they once were, but I think it's important to go over these situations because they can be used as stalling tactics and pretty effective stalling tactics. An emphasis should be placed to eliminate stalling when guys are riding legs from the top position. And the burden to wrestle aggressively and score with the legs is generally put on the top wrestler, not the defensive wrestler in this regard. All right, so we're going to go over a couple situations. And there's caveats to everything, and there's yeah, buts and things, but I'm just going to try to give you some basic guidelines. So when the legs are in and the wrestlers are on the mat and the top man is not working aggressively. So let's say he's got both legs in, he's got that double grapevine, and he's just around an arm and a head. He's just holding on to a power half or locked onto a forearm with a cross face. He's got the guy broken. He's not trying anything. He's staying stuck on the move. He's not chain wrestling. And we clearly have a situation where the defensive wrestler can't do anything at this point. Then the first time we stop this with a stalemate. All right? And when we stop this with a stalemate, we are going to give a verbal command to the offensive wrestler. Hey, when you're using the legs, you need to consistently work to improve your position. The next one is going to be a stalling. And if he does the same thing, he's not working aggressively, he's got the legs in, then if we stop it again, it's going to be stalling on the offensive wrestler. And here's really why, if he's working and just we have stalemate situations that occur where both wrestlers can't improve their position, then maybe we consider giving a second stalemate if the offensive guy is trying. But generally speaking, we'll see these where he's not looking to improve his position. And we make this call on the second stop because multiple stalemates would allow an offensive wrestler to burn a lot of time off the clock. So that's why we want to verbally give that command after that first stalemate so the wrestler and the coach know what to expect and what's coming. How much time should we give a wrestler to try to work through a situation? Again, it varies. It's judgment. To me, I'm in that 17, 18 second range as he's working. And once again, this is why if he's really not doing anything, 2 stalemates and then a stalling penalty isn't fair to the defensive wrestler because we can allow nearly a minute to burn off the clock with him getting buried under there without the offensive guy really wasting a whole lot of energy and just using a stalling technique. Okay, second situation. The legs are in, they stand, and there's no rudder leg in on the mat. So that far leg, that rudder leg it's a double grapevine situation. Bottom man stands, comes to his feet. There's no attempt by the offensive wrestler to get that rudder leg out. The first time we stop this for a potentially dangerous, and we restart them. All right? And again, we're going to verbally warn the top wrestler, the offensive wrestler here. We can't penalize the bottom wrestler for making a wrestling move by coming to his feet. In this situation, this is one of the particular specific situations that I talked with Bob Whitaker concerning this. So if this happens a second time, it is going to be stalling on the offensive wrestler. Again, bottom man is not to be penalized for making a wrestling move. Generally speaking, when they come up, the offensive guy should be able to get that rudder leg out, and these guys will work through that position. Now we have when the bottom man stands, the offensive wrestler has one leg in, right? So they come to their feet, one leg is in, and we see these instances where the offensive wrestler then jumps on the back and throws the rudder leg in, and he's hanging on the back. It's creating a potentially dangerous situation that we have to immediately stop. And this is to be penalized as a stalling on the offensive wrestler the very first time. This is an intentional, egregious act on the part of the offensive wrestler to create a stoppage, and this should be penalized accordingly. Again, when he's got that rudder leg on the mat, we give them time. These guys are generally going to work through those situations. Okay, now we switch to defensive position. Again, here's the theme. Listen to the verbiage. When the defensive wrestler refuses to aggressively work for an escape or reversal, he or she should be warned and then penalized for stalling. Officials should be, again, looking for honest attempts that the bottom guy's making to, if he's broken down, work up to his base, work for that reversal, or attempting to get perpendicular, get to the mat, get up on his feet, and work for that escape. Other keys to recognizing stalling on the defensive wrestler is he continuously basing up without making any honest attempts. Guys that are broken down, they get back up to their base and they just have this bent elbow base, this tight base, and they're just sitting there stuck on the mat. We also see guys when they're kind of balled up in the fetal position, they may be broken down and they're taking their arms and they're hiding it underneath their chest. There's really nothing the offensive wrestler can do at this point, and that needs to be called as stalling by the official. And also, a hallmark of stalling for the bottom man is forehead on the mat, forearms, arms out, without an attempt to even pick his head up off the mat. I don't allow that to go on for very long before I make the stalling call on the bottom wrestler. Bottom wrestler is broken down. You see his hands are out, just locked, trying to prevent the offensive guy from being able to do anything, or he's just clamping down on an arm and holding an arm or a leg of the offensive wrestler and not trying to score with it, just for the purposes of hold it and trying to prevent wrestling moves and action from occurring. That's stalling. Also, guys on bottom, you see it. He's close to a boundary. He's been getting worked, tilted, halved, and he just crawls out of bounds. Guys crawl out of bounds, create a stoppage. That gets hit for stalling. And then also, we talked about riding the hip, so we want to look at it in the defensive position. All right, we're trying to determine, is the defensive guy stalling or not? All right, when pressure comes off the hip, when the offensive guy comes out off the hip and there's no pressure there, right, the defensive guy should be we should start to see those hips rise, that base be built by the defensive wrestler. And if it's not, we know he's content with staying underneath there, not doing anything, catching a breather, and that needs to be penalized. Okay, we have a couple other stalling tactics that happen, and these are the most common. One is straggling back from out of bounds, and this is really illustrated when we have a wrestler who's in shape, he's ready to wrestle, we had him out of bounds, and he races to the center, and he's ready to go, and we look over as an official, and what do we see? We see the opponent, and he's still on his butt, sitting on the boundary line, slow to get up, slow to move, and get back, and he's straggling back, all right? We want to encourage them to get back to the center, and if they don't, we want to penalize that, especially if they're straggling consistently. We want to make sure that we're not allowing that to happen, because that's an unfair opportunity for that student athlete to catch his breath. Also, we see guys that they delay assuming the starting position by excessively adjusting headgear or pads. I hate it when we have an out-of-bounds situation and there's nothing wrong with the guy's headgear. And what does he do? He unsnaps his headgear, he takes it off, puts it back on, adjusts it, snaps it back on, creating a 15, 30-second delay. It's unnecessary. If there's an issue with the headgear, yes, he certainly should be able to adjust that prior to the start. We don't want to have any kind of unfair advantage being given. But sometimes we see this excessively. Also, when guys just aren't getting settled, especially when they're assuming the bottom or the top position and they're being very slow. Are you set? They're not responding to you. They're continuing to move. They're continuing to adjust. Guys need to be set quickly. There needs to be no delays when we're getting guys set. This is not an opportunity for a break. All right, I just want to cover shoe rules. All right, we have a couple shoelace rules that I want to clarify. When they report to the table, we assume that their shoes are properly secured, double knotted, taped, laced through the top eyelet. We're assuming that those shoelaces are properly laced. The shoe is being worn as intended by the manufacturer. And when a shoelace becomes untied on the mat, when wrestling is occurring, it is an automatic stalling call. So just know that. When shoelace becomes untied, it is an automatic stalling call. When the shoe comes off, that's a technical violation. Okay? Shoelace is untied, stalling. Shoe comes off completely and has to be put back on. We're going to stop the match. We're going to start injury time. And we're going to penalize a technical violation against that wrestler and give the point or technical violation point to the opponent or points. and we're going to allow that injury clock to run until that shoe is secured back on that foot and laced properly. And then we stop it and we restart. Okay, we have a couple stalling exceptions. Okay, it's not stalling when a defensive wrestler is being overpowered by his opponent. Sometimes we'll hear coaches scream at this in the neutral position. My guy's being overpowered. How can you call my guy for stalling? But the rule book, you once again, read the rule book. The rule book is it's not stalling when the defensive wrestler, and this is generally when double grapevines are in, a guy's broken down, there's nothing he can do. You know, a guy's laying on him, he's strong, he's got him in a hold where there's nothing he can do. He can't execute a wrestling move. He's being overpowered. It is not his you know, it's not his fault he's in that position, and that's not to be called. Also, there's a distinction between fling the mat and stalling, right? They're similar in regards to, you know, we're leaving the wrestling area of a means of avoiding wrestling, but fling the mat, that is a technical violation where we're leaving the wrestling area as a means to avoid wrestling when scoring is imminent. Okay, so that's the deciding factor. When scoring is imminent, it's a fling the mat. When scoring is not imminent and it's just used as a means of avoiding wrestling, then it's going to be a stalling call. And now we have a change with that. I'm sure Bob went over that in his first video, is that we used to have double jeopardy. You could get hit for a fling and you could be scored on. So if you were poor at fling and you got scored on, then it was the prerogative of the official where he can make both those calls. And now if you don't do a great job at fling and you get taken down and points are awarded, you know, the flea is not in play. Okay. Stalling shall be called consistently throughout the match, including the sudden victory period for the two 30-second tiebreakers. Stalling in the 30-second ultimate tiebreaker is the only exception to how you would call stalling the exception, since the offensive wrestler's responsibility is simply for control. So the first time that there's obvious stalling on the top wrestler in the ultimate tiebreaker only, we would call that a stalemate first, and then if it's repeated again and subsequently, the next call will be stalling. Keep in mind, this is a 30-second period. So we're not to allow him in an obvious stalling position to hold that hold for 10, 15, 20 seconds. You see this all the time, and it burns all the time off the clock, and the defensive wrestler is put at a huge disadvantage. Make that call and make that call quickly. And then lastly, coach's conference, and I'm going to conclude with this. Coach's conference for stalling call. Coach has the prerogative at any point during a break in the action to come to the table. That includes for stalling, even though we say it's 99% judgment. Right? It's his prerogative to come to the table, and it's our responsibility to allow him to have the ability to have that conference. So break in the action, we keep the wrestlers in the 10-foot circle, we go to the scores table, we keep our eye on the wrestlers the entire time. Coach, how can I help you? What's your question? We give him the courtesy, he can ask his question. Two things are going to happen from the coach here. Right? He's going to give you, he's either going to ask an informational question or he's going to give you an editorial comment. And here's the difference. An informational question is, hey, Mr. Official, I know you called my guy on top for stalling. Was that because he was riding the Western hook and just had the 2-on-1 and was hanging on to it? And you'd say, yes, that's exactly right, coach. And the coach is like, yes, thank you. And he goes back. I don't know necessarily that it's my prerogative as an official to penalize the coach for that. He asked an informational question. It was brief. It was courteous. As long as he's not excessively creating delays, he's not really questioning my judgment. He's not asking or positing that there's been a misapplication of a rule. He's simply asking an informational question. I give him my answer. He's got no follow-up. No, yeah, but what's the defensive guy doing? He's not following up there. If he does that, or if he's questioning my judgment, or if he's giving me that editorial comment, hey, how could you call my guy for stalling there? Then, of course, we're going to be courteous to him. Then we're going to walk out to the boundary line and in front of the coach, both coaches, the contestants, the crowd, the scores table. We're going to give the signal for a coach's misconduct. And we don't do that at the table because sometimes if we're just at the table, other people don't know that that call has been made. So that's why we go out onto the mat area, we make that call. And now that should be the end of it. If the coach then comes back to the table and wants to continue, now we're really looking at unsportsmanlike conduct penalties are in play depending on how the coach approaches us. But hey, I just want to thank everybody for your time. I know I'm naturally long-winded, but I hope this was comprehensive and that everybody was able to learn something from this.
Thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate that information on stalling. I'll let anybody who wants to ask a question now, feel free to put that question in. I do have one though for you, Jeremy. If you could kind of cover double stalling a little bit. They understand it's possibly a bad call or however you want to take that, but they just kind of want to hear your perspective and maybe some ideas of calling it and things like that.
Don't make the call. So that's my approach to double stalling. Don't call both wrestlers at the same time for stalling. If you did, there is some rule book justification for that, but if both wrestlers are stalling, what I'm going to do is I'm going to recognize the student athlete, the wrestler who is stalling. In my opinion, he's carrying the burden of the stalling, and I'm going to make that call. I may follow that up 5 seconds, 7 seconds, 10 seconds later with calling the opponent for stalling. But very rarely will I make a double stalling call. It just looks poor. It's not a good call. And we've been told at a lot of different levels that that's not a call that we make out on the mat. So even though it seems like both wrestlers are stalling, again, be in position, evaluate what's happening, recognize stalling, make the call.
Thank you, Jeremy, for that. Here's another one. Wrestlers who look at the clock, would you agree that that's stalling, as it could be seen as they're kind of coasting, kind of waiting for it to end type of things? What's your view on wrestlers who keep looking back at the clock or at the clock type of deal?
Yeah. In my PowerPoint presentation, it's chock full of notes that y'all didn't get to see, but that's one of the things. Looking at the clock isn't necessarily stalling. I mean, I can have a guy that's winning a match and is wrestling aggressively and is scoring, and he takes a peek at the clock. He's still continuing to work. He's not, it's when guys are staring at the clock and they're taking the foot off the gas pedal and they're not continuing to wrestle aggressively. Then yes, typically when a guy's looking at a clock, he's doing so because he's worn out, he's tired, he's not in shape, and he's trying to get a sense of what's happening. But looking at the clock not necessarily, by itself is stalling. It could be indicative of stalling, but it is not stalling just because he looks at the clock.
Awesome. If the top man had both legs in and the bottom man stands, and this has happened twice now, who is stalling?
Top wrestler. Okay, top wrestler. The bottom man standing up is a wrestling move. I mean, he's looking for a reversal. He's looking to get to his feet to work for an escape. We can't penalize the defensive wrestler for working to his feet. The onus is on the top wrestler. He can always get that rudder leg out. He can work through the situation. And again, this is where preventative officiating comes into play. This happens one time. We are going to, loud enough for coach and contestant to hear, we are going to let them know that the next time that occurs and they don't work properly through the situation and it ends up in a potentially dangerous, that is going to be a stalling call.
Awesome. I do not have any more questions that have come through. Hang on, here's one in the chat. Let's see. Oh, Don Weekly said, "Great job, Jeremy." So with that, I believe we are done. As Jeremy mentioned, he does have notes in his PowerPoint. So once I get that from him later on tonight or tomorrow, as I mentioned, it will get posted on the Efficient Central Hub. So you'll have all those notes available to you as well that he was referring to, that you weren't able to see tonight, for further use and more information for yourself. Robbie, you have anything you want to say?
No, just heads up. We're gonna have a couple more of these in September. Jeremy Hernandez will send those out. Just want to thank Jeremy Walton for his presentation. It was really good, and I appreciate everybody taking the time and coming out.
Hey, thank you for this opportunity, Jeremy and Robbie.
Yes, sir. No problem. Thank you for taking the time out and doing this for us. So with that said, we hope everyone continues to be safe. And like I said earlier, we look forward to getting the season rolling and kind of go back to somewhat of a normalcy in school and in athletics. So again, stay safe. This will get posted online, so be on the lookout for that within the next couple of days. And everyone have a good night. Thank you.
Take care. Be safe.
All right, take care.